So welcome everybody. We are actually still on Chavtet MHB. If someone would ask you outside of the shiur, how's the shiur going? You making any progress? Depends what you mean by progress. We've not done that much by way of breadth, but hopefully we're gaining skills and, of course, yediot, knowledge in terms of the depth component. Last we focused on a section that was rather complicated in the Rishimot Shiurim of Maran Harav Yosef Dov Levi Soloveitchik. We saw umpteen different examples of how that was going to be playing out vis-a-vis the understanding of the Rav in various contexts of the two different types of Hiddur Mitzvah, both that which is a general concept of enhancement of mitzvot, as opposed to a particular type of usage of the expression Hiddur Mitzvah, which was not just an enhancement, but was really li'ikuva, where the word noi, the decorative or aesthetic component, was part and parcel of the kiyum of the mitzvah. And what the Rav set up was, this was based on the idea of the notion of the chalot shem shamayim upon this object. We saw various examples. Lulav was only one of them. We went through a number of them. I'm not going back to review it again now. If you got it, good. If not, they're all archived online. You're welcome to go back and to see it there. Welcome back, Benny Benjamin. I'm sorry, I didn't welcome you. Welcome back. I haven't seen you in a little while. I forgot to mention also technically, everyone keep your phone muted, but by all means unmute or write something in the chat if you want to speak, either of those. I want to do one more thing tonight about Hiddur Mitzvah, and then I want to actually move forward in the Gemara, which, as you know, when you're at the beginning of Perek Lulav Hagazul, really doesn't mean covering a blot. It means reading 5 more sentences. But again, this is not a course that is a survey course. There's nothing wrong with a survey course. I'm not knocking a Daf Yomi, Khalil, anything like that. But we're learning here. We're diving deeper. Tonight I want to share with you the Torah of the Minchas Asher, of Asher Weiss. So Zayin Gesund and Stark Yerushalayim Yira Kodesh. This man, through the crucible of COVID, has produced 3 volumes of Sheilot and Tshuva, people from ICUs and people in terrible straits related to the virus, and then all sorts of Tshuvot in the realm of Orach Chaim, particularly davening, but also a lot of communities have reached out to him, let's say ours among them generally, for guidance, and incredibly erudite, sensible, practical. He has a sefer called the Klalei HaMitzvot. Every chapter is another section focused on a halachic principle and its analysis throughout Shas. The Minchat Asher has actually a chapter in Hiddur Mitzvah. I'm not going to tell you the whole chapter. I'm not going to put it even up on the screen. Let me just share with you some elements of it, because it gives us another way of understanding what the importance and significance of Hiddur Mitzvah is, recognizing, such as he does, and we do, that it is, on one level, actually in the Torah. It's a drasha in the Torah from a pasuk in the Torah Kedosh and Torah Shebichtav, which is in Parshat B'Shalach. At the same time, it's hardly in a normative section. It's not a section of mitzvahs. It's a Shirat Hayam. Now, it's not to denigrate the Shirat Hayam, but we're deriving mitzvahs from Shirat Hayam. It didn't say, if I deber Shimon Shalimur, Savat B'nei Yisrael Marta Alehem, with 10 things. It's in the middle of a song. And in the middle of the song, they said, where they're praising Hashem, Zeh Keli V'Anveyu. And the Gemara, we saw this Gemara inside, says, oh, Hitna Lefana B'Mitzvah, we learned this, Zeh Keli V'Anveyu. So the question is, and there are, of course, practical implications for this, is Hiddur Mitzvah a biblical or a rabbinic mitzvah altogether? In other words, it's not. No one's claiming that it is one of the 613 mitzvot, because it is an application to certain mitzvot, or maybe globally to all mitzvot, but it's something that you could say is a part of the world of Deoraita. Or do you say, no, it's a rabbinic idea. They needed an asmachta, they needed a hint, therefore they attached it, they hung it on something in the Torah Shebichtav, and that was the word Zeh Keli V'Anvehu. So the Minchat Asher begins by saying it seems obvious that it's actually Deoraita. If it's an asmachta, the Gemara would have said it's an asmachta. Remember, asmachta means, for lack of a better term, it's a mnemonic device. It's a tool of, it's more than mnemonic device. That's incorrect, because that's like to memorize it. It's a way of anchoring what is otherwise a rabbinic idea hinted at somewhere in the Torah. It's an asmachta. it's leaning on something in the Torah, lismoch, but it is not properly derived from the words themselves. There's a concept and we need to attach it to something. But that's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara seems to be learning Davka halachic implications. And I want to show you one example which Rav Asher Weiss points to. It's a very, obviously, it's the headquarters of the notion of Hiddur Mitzvah. And one of our advantages is Zoom. I can just put it right up on the screen. It's the Gemara itself in Gemara Shabbat, Kuf Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. I hope everyone can see it. The actual words that I've been focused on and talking about again and again is here, right? Where are we? Here. Zekeli vanveu hitna'el lefanav b'mitzvot. Sorry, it doesn't highlight properly, but it's these lines. Starting from here, hitna lefanav b'mitzvot, right? B'mitzvot. Asel lefanav Sukka na'eh, lulav na'eh, v'shofar na'eh, tzitzit na'eh, sefer Torah na'eh, etc. Yeah, it keeps going. That's the headquarters right here. Says Rav Asher Weiss. Look at what the context was of the discussion that brought us into this particular section. What is that? It's a discussion which, now you have a Dvar Torah for your Shabbos table for Parshat Lech Lecha, concerns the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Don't jump on me. I'm well aware. There's a machloket. Is the mitzvah of Brit Milah truly in Parshat Lech Lecha, or is it truly in Parshat Tazria? And here in Parshat Lech Lecha is a description of someone who got a direct command, but it's not the mitzvah lidorot. This is an argument back and forth. According to the Sefer HaChinuch, Parshat Lech Lecha is the headquarters, the source for the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Many other Monei HaMitzvot, I'll mention the Rambam among them, maintain that Brit Milah is really sourced in Parshat Tazria, Uviyom Hashmini, Yimol Basar or Lato, and it is not sourced in Sefer Breshit, since mitzvot were not given prior to Matan Torah, which, by the by, would be a good question about Zekeli Van Veu also, by the way. But okay, leave that discussion aside for half a minute. Let's just see the sugya inside. I already see the chat came in. A smachta is a hint in the text. It's a link to a mitzvah. It's a link to a mitzvah, but it's derived. It's part of the creative of Chazal. It's not a received tradition. And a smachta means Chazal said you attach it over here at Barema. Sorry, that was jumping back, but I ignored that previously. Apologies. Okay, again, feel free to send in the comments. I'm going to try to stay with them. What's the subject? The subject is, let's say a person is doing a Brit Milah on Shabbos. Normally, of course, one would not do mitzvahs on Shabbos. That would countermand Shabbos. However, the mitzvah of Brit Milah, since the Torah uses the expression B'yom hashmini yimol basar or lato, we learn through derivations we won't go into now, if the Brit Milah falls out on Shabbos and everything checks out from a halachic vantage point, there are various conditions that have to be met. But if a boy is born on a Shabbos, 8 days later, the birth is on a Shabbos. We know that Milah is Doche Shabbat. So here's the question, and I'm by no means an expert on the technicalities of the performance of the mitzvah, even though I've attended many Brit Milahs, but here's the basic idea. The Tana Rabbanan, Hamal, one who's engaged in Brit Milah, Kol Zman Shu Osek Bamilah, as long as the person, the moel, is still engaged in the act of Brit Milah, he's doing the cutting itself of the orla, choser, he can go back to return to parts he's already cut from. Bein alatzitzin hama'akvin milah, whether it's the fringes of the foreskin that are ma'akvin milah, means without their removal, one has not truly performed the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Bein al hatzitzin she'ein ma'akvin milah, regardless of whether it's the tzitzin, means the fringes or the edges of the, I think they call it the rim around the corona of the organ. So if it's not removed completely, so sometimes there are fringes, and again, I'm no expert in the technicalities of it. I'm not a moel, but there are fringes there that are ma'akvin milah. If they're not removed by the moel, there's no milah. Sometimes there are fringes that are not ma'akev the milah. If they're not removed, the Brit Milah is still kosher. But the Gemara here says that regardless of which types of threads or strands of orla we're speaking about here, you're allowed to keep going to continue to cut on Shabbos. Pirish, if you separated yourself from the mitzvah, meaning you went away, the guy went to go have a coffee and he came back 20 minutes later, once you leave, when you come back, you're no longer allowed to continue doing the Brit Milah on the tzitzin she'ein ma'akvin milah, because if the kosher Brit Milah happened, then you cannot continue later on. So Mantana Piresh Eino Choser. Who is it that holds that if you went away, you cannot go back again? It starts to quote who this might have been. Huh? And the Gemara goes into a discussion. It's Rabbi Yochanan. We can learn it here. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Brokahi. It's from this from Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. The Tanya. This is our situation this year. So now you have a Dvar Torah Parsha Lechacha, and for Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbat, you can pull it to Gemara in Shabbat Kuf Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. You can take it out and show everybody. So here we have it. Arba Asar Shechal Yod b'Shabbat Mafshit HaPesach Ad HaChazeh. When a person is doing the hafshata, means the removal of the skin of a korban pesach, but the korban pesach has to be cooked on erev pesach shechal liot b'Shabbat. Erev pesach is a Shabbos. Remember, where you're allowed to do various mitzvot aseh when they conflict, but only to a certain point, it seems. So this opinion, this is Div Rabbi Shmuel benos Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. He holds once you can go until the breastbone, and that's all you can take off, but not more. The Chachamim say you could take off you could skin the entire animal. The question is, we're arguing back and forth between these two opinions. How far can you go when you're allowed to perform a mitzvah on Shabbos that's somehow superseding Shabbos? How far can you go? Just the bare minimum? Or you can do the full amount that you would normally do had it not been Shabbos. Mimai, Adkan lo ka'amar Rabbi Shmuel benos Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka hat, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka hatam, mishum delo ba'inan zekeli ve'anvehu. The Gemara says that's not necessarily a good proof that it's the same argument. If you went away from the Brit Milah on Shabbat, you cannot remove the tzitzin, the fringes, she'ein and ma'akvin et milah, because you left. But if you're still doing it, continue going, right? How come you can't go back? So, it's because we're the Shita of Shmuel Benosh Broka. Gemara says that's not a good comparison. No, Adkan look Rabbi Shmuel Benosh Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka hatam mishum dulaba'inan zekili vanveyu. In the case of the hafshata, means the flaying, the skinning of the skinning and the flaying of the korban pesach. So there's no zekili vanveyu there. So there's an opinion here and there if you can do the whole hafshata or not, because it's Shabbos and maybe you can't do the rest of the hafshata because that's already a violation of Shabbos. You have to cook the animal as is. However, aval hacha, what's hacha? In the case of Brit Milah, debayin on zekili vanveyu. Right, but and then the Gemara goes on. But basically, the point is, in the case of Brit Milah, the tzitzin she'ein ma'akvin. Back up here, tzitzin she'ein ma'akvin et amila. Right, there you require. It's an issue of zekeli vanveyu. The argument going back and forth over here between these opinions is that tzitzin she'ein ma'akvin amila. Why are you allowed to do it on Shabbos? Maybe you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos because it's not actually critical to the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Says the Gemara in this discussion. No, but the reason why you're allowed to keep doing it is because it's zekeli vanveyu. Says Rav Asher Weiss. You know why they're talking about zekeli vanveyu? Because clearly it's a deoraita component. If it wasn't a deoraita component, then you would say you're not going to keep doing an enhancement which is no more than a rabbinic enhancement, which is some asmachta. You're breaking Shabbos. You can't do that. Vide, times when Chazal were concerned about carrying without an Erev, and that's why we didn't have shofar and lulav the first days of those respective Yamim Tovim. Indeed, this is the opinion of the Shagat Aryeh. This is the opinion of Chidushi Anshe Shem, quoted on the Dape Harif, that this shows that it's obviously Deoraita. Rav Asher Weiss said, wait a minute, I don't know if that's really such a perfect proof. After all, the Minchat said, maybe the issue is that you're still Osek ba'oto inyan. You're still in the middle of doing the mitzvah. So once you're in the middle of doing the mitzvah, so there's a deoraita component, and you're enhancing the deoraita mitzvah because you keep on going. And therefore, you're allowed to continue. But if you stopped doing the Brit Milah, again, the guy took a coffee break, and he comes back after, why shouldn't he be, if really zekeli vanveyu means that Hiddur mitzvah is a mitzvah deoraita, we should say to the moel, of course you should continue, because there's an aspect of the mitzvah of Milah called zekeli vanveyu, and that still hasn't been performed. Therefore, that's also Docha Shabbos. We do not say that. Rav Asher Weiss basically said, look, I'm not, who am I to tussle the Shagat Aryeh and the Chidush Anshe Shem, but when you think about the idea here, it's possible one doesn't need to say that this Gemara is some kind of knockdown proof that Zekeli vanveyu is a mitzvah deoraita itself. Eruv does have a lot to do with Chazal's concern about carrying, but the fact is that you don't have an Eruv in the cases that Chazal were describing about lulav, shofar and lulav on the first day when it falls out on Shabbos. In other words, they don't account for, well, what if there's an Eruv in that town? They assume there isn't going to be an Eruv, or eventually there'll be towns without Eruv in, and they'll be in trouble. So say, okay, Sheval Tasa, we're not going to do those mitzvahs.
Rabbi, the point of my comment was I thought they were only worried about carrying in a Rishut Harabim where an Eruv doesn't do any good anyway. I don't think they were worried about carrying in somewhere where it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan.
True enough. I stand corrected. Thank you. Agreed. The point is, though, Chazal were concerned about the notion that there was going to be some kind of violation of Shabbos, and they weren't prepared to take the chance, even though it meant not doing a mitzvah d'oraita. So too here, I think actually what you're saying it makes even more sense, an application over here. The mitzvah baba avera component, if it really is truly completely d'oraita, so why don't you let the guy pirish chazar pirish over here? Where is it? The Gemara says pirish. Pirish. If he separate himself, so al tzitzin ma'akvid mila, those strands which are ma'akev, which would be crucial to the fulfillment of mitzvah brit milah, so you can do it again. You can go back and finish. But al tzitzin she'ein ma'akvid mila, ein achos, you can't go back. So the Gemara is saying, well, why not? Oh, that's according to the opinion that holds, right? That about being mafshit the korban pesach on erev pesach shechal b'Shabbat. Whereas it's not comparable. That's not zekili venveu. Again, the discussion goes on about brit milah. Rav Asher is just making the point. It's not such a knockdown proof that it's deoraita. It could be that it's because you were involved in the mitzvah. So once you're involved in the basic mitzvah, you can do the extra component of the mitzvah as well. The Ritvan Masechet Sukka points out that we have this idea that the Rabbanan also seem to agree with Rabbi Yehuda that you should be ma'aged your lulav, right? The lulav, the hadas, and the ravut should be in a bundle. So what happens if you didn't do it? It's not li'ikuva. If you neglected to put it in a bundle, you're still going to be yotze the mitzvah. So said the Ritva, Masechet Sukkah and Daf Yud Aleph. So it can't be that there's a mitzvah deoraita that it's lechatchila deoraita and b'diavad deoraita it's going to be kosher. It doesn't work like that. If it's really a deoraita requirement, because the expression used is according to the Rabbanan, my mitzvah. So the word mitzvah here, which they say is a zekeli van veu related mitzvah. So if it really is deoraita, there wasn't going to be a split here between lechatchila and b'diavad. It's going to be a requirement that you have to do it, not that if you'd like to do it, it's a nice idea. Which tells us that the fact that Rabbanan are willing to say the mitzvah of putting the egghead around the daled minim, or at least 3 out of the 4, for the sake of Hiddur, that must only be the Rabbanan. That was the Ritva's approach. So the Minchat says like this: I don't think there's really a machloket here between people who hold it's right and people who hold it's the Rabbanan. And this is a classic idea that Rav Asher Weiss is very fond of, that he comes up with in many, many areas throughout his writing. He made his name first, and I have it up on my shelf. The Minchas Asher on Parsha Shavua. He goes through the 5 books of the Torah, and every week there's 5-6 essays, halachic essays, analyze these. So this is one of his devices he likes to go back to. He said maybe the notion of Hiddur mitzvah is what he calls a hora'ah klalit. It's a general lesson, a general mitzvah, a general deoraita component. But Chazal were then given the power to set the parameters for its application. Not only when it's applied, but the severity or scope of its application. He notes that the Chidushi Anshe Shem, who themselves hold that mitzvah, that Hiddur mitzvah is the oraita, they note that the Ikar Hiddur mitzvah min HaTorah. The Ikar means the main idea of it is from the Torah, and it is. The Gemara never said it's an asmachta, but just because something is a general principle in halacha that was taught based on something deoraita doesn't mean that all of its applications are themselves going to be deoraita. He gives a great example from next week's parsha. Vayashkem Avram Baboker, at the beginning of the Akedah. And what do we learn from there? The Gemara learns, Zrizin Makdimin LaMitzvot. It is a mitzvah. You're supposed to do things in a Zari's manner, right? So Rav Asher Weiss says, yeah, that's true, but He calls it midine ha'hanhaga ha'reuya. It's a din that tells you how to be, but it's not liikuva when it comes to kiyum mitzvot. You're not going to apply it to the following 5 things and say, well, if you didn't do this reason might kiyum mitzvot. For those that don't recall, means you're going to have alacrity when you go to do a mitzvah. It's interesting. I'll mention parenthetically, maybe somewhat editorially, and I know there are many complicating factors for so many people, but it so happens that there was a time not so long ago in America that I remember when in an Orthodox community, when there was a baby born, the bris is going to be in the morning, right after Shachris. Why? Zrizin makdim mitzvahs. I was shocked when I came to Eretz Yisrael for my many years ago, my year in yeshiva, and I saw they were doing a bris milah, 2 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon. Even in Yeshivat Har Etzion, Rav Aaron Zatzal and Rav Amital Zatzal was standing in the hallway downstairs in the yeshiva, and they're making a bris in the middle of the afternoon. I used to ask people, why? What happened to this reason? So they said, look, people have to travel from this place and that. The guy in Chadera and the person up in the Galil, they want to come down to the bris. They can't make it so early. They get 1 day off a week. It's Shabbos. Sunday they work. So they do it in the afternoon. The guy has to take off, half a day as it is. It's interesting. To me, it feels like it filtered to America. I find more and more there are reasons why when's the bris? 5 p.m. Why 5 p.m.? What happened to Shachris? Can't wake up, can't do this, can't do that. But there is an Indian from Avram Avinu, Davka's reason makdim in the mitzvah. I'll end how I began this little editorial aside. I know there's a lot of complicating factors, and they got to wait for the grandfather or the grandmother, and someone's flying from Detroit. I get it. I'm just saying it's to me, in my living life, I've seen, I don't know if anyone else sees it this way, a transition away from reason makdim in the mitzvah. But back to our subject. That was a commercial message. Rav Usher Weiss says, okay, so Zuzi Makdim Mitzvah. It means it's a general way of being. Hiddur Mitzvah is a general way of being, but Chazal here are empowered to define how to apply it and also when to be machmir, to say it's going to be posel even b'di'evet, as opposed to saying, look, it's a lechatchila in this instance, but it's not going to be something that we have to be machmir or makpid on. B'di'evet will say it's okay. I mean, I thought this was really just an astounding idea. He goes on, he says, let me show you a proof to my idea. And for those who were in the shiur last week and the week before, I hope you'll be able to connect the dots to what we learned from Rav Soloveitchik, because he's using the same material. I did not see any quotation in this essay. It's a whole chapter where he quotes Rav Soloveitchik directly. I don't know if he's aware of Rav Soloveitchik, doesn't want to mention him. I have no idea. I just don't know. And I know people are close to Rav Asher Weiss, and I would like to ask them. I don't know if he engages the Rav elsewhere on this. When you look at Rashi and Tosafot on our blot on 29b, you note that the discussion is surrounding whether or not the words Zekeli and Vehu are a psul when it comes to lulav. Remember, Rashi says yes, Zekeli and Vehu is the psul, and Tosafot say it's never been the psul. Remember, Tosafot say no, the psul here is hadar. There's no such thing as a mitzvah that could be puzzle because of not making some kind of standard of Zekeli and Vehu. It doesn't exist. And that's the machlokin. We saw that in the Rav. Says Rav Asher Weiss, if you look in the Gemara in Gittin that we had studied, it's the story of what happens when a person is trying to write the name of Hashem. In fact, they wanted to write the name of Hashem, but by accident, they lost track of what they were doing, and they accidentally thought they were writing the word Yehuda. So they wrote the Yud, they wrote the Hey, they wrote the Vav, and now, right before they write the Dalid, which really they realize, wait a second, it's Vayidaber Hashem, El Moshe Limor, I got to write this name of Hashem. So the machloket is, can the guy go over with the kulmus, the stylus, to fix the letters, Yud, Hey, and Vav? He didn't say L'Shem, you should say Fator before he wrote it. Can you sort of make the impression on these letters? After all, these 3 letters are Yud, a Hey, and a Vav. They don't stop just erase them, especially if you want to vest them with the Kedusha of one of the Shemot, of the Azkarot of Hashem, one of the names of God. Rabbi Yehuda says you can be mavir the kulmus. The Chachamim said you cannot do that. It's not nice to do that. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, you know why that is? You know why the Chachamim are opposed to Rabbi Yehuda's view? Very simple. Zekeli ve'anveyu. And once you write it down that way, you've ruined it. So here it is. Rav Asher Weiss says, remember that case? While Tosafot Masechet Sukka said there's never such a thing as a psul b'di'evet because of Zekeli ve'anvehu, that was their retort to Rashi. If you want to know what I'm talking about, it's the top Tosafot on 29b. Guess what? This is the example. It says in the Gemara in Gittin that the rationale of the Chachamim, why they told Rabbi Yehuda, you cannot go back now and fix it by putting a stylus on it. You're ruining it. What are you ruining? Zeh keli ve'anveyu. So Rav Asher Weiss said, here you go. There's the case. Tosafot. You don't remember the case in the Gemara in Gittin. How's that you didn't say, oh, but there is a case where zeh keli ve'anveyu causes a psul even b'diavad? So the answer comes from the Shoel Umeshiv, Rav Nottenson, who lived in the, the 19th century, not in one of his Sheilos and Shuvas. This shows like the breadth of Asher Weiss, because I would never found this. It's in an introduction to a sefer written by the Baal Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, another sefer that he wrote, where it describes as follows. The Shoel Umeshiv says that the Gemara in Gittin, on Daf Chaf, about the rewriting of the letters, is not like the story of the tzitzin hama'akvin, shein ma'akvin and amila that's in the Gemara Masachet Shabbat. Why? The Gemara in Gittin is telling us that the words Zeh Keli ve'anveyu, this is my God, Keli. It refers to the writing of Hashem's name. That's what I have to beautify. And therefore, there's a requirement of noi miyuchad, special beauty that has to be in the writing of the name. That's not true for the Brit Milah. That's not true for the tzitzin she'en ma'akvin, and ergo, that's also not true, according to Tosafot, that's also not true for a lulav. It's not one of God's names. So that's the idea of Rav Nottenson. And the Minchat analyzes in this, he says, if you think about it, Shoel Umeshiv makes a lot of sense. It's not an issue for other words that you write in the Torah even. It's not for the word Moshe. It's not for the word Vayidaber. It's for the words of the name of God. That's the machloket in the Gemara in Gittin. And Rav Asher Weiss says, see, a perfect example where Chazal have this general idea. It's a general, call it mitzvah, called Zeh keli ve'anveyu. And that's how you should fulfill all of your mitzvot. Beautiful sukkah, beautiful lulav, beautiful this, beautiful tefillin, beautiful this, that, right? Beautiful talit. But sometimes Chazal give it extra juice. They say, in this case, it is li'ikuva. What's that case? A unique case. When it involves Zeh keli, this is my God. Or in the case of Asher Weiss explaining the Shoel Umeshiv, this is the writing of the name of God. Therefore, Zeh keli ve'anveyu is actually a higher standard of noi that is required as such. So there are a few more twists and turns here. I see we just hit the halfway mark, so I don't want to belabor it too much. But the point is, Rav Asher Weiss basically says, that's what's going to be li'ikuva. What sukkah, when it comes to sukkah and lulav and a talis and all of that, that's not going to be li'ikuva. Because there's this general principle, you should beautify it. If you didn't, okay, it wasn't the name of Hashem. Contrast all of this with what we said in Rav Soloveitchik's idea. For Rav Soloveitchik, and you see the difference between the two in terms of the analysis. I'll admit I'm biased because I grew up in the yeshivas that were greatly influenced by the Rav. To me, the Rav's analysis that we saw last time goes much deeper, much more fundamentally into the concept of what is Hiddur mitzvah when it pertains to something that the chalot, shem, shamayim, is on that object. Remember we were talking about the lulav and the nanuim, or the example of kiddush that we had. There are other examples also. That's the point, is that according to the Rav, there were two types of noi. There is the general noi, but then there's the noi of the chalot, shem, shamayim, on the object through or in the presence of this object that we're mekadesh, shem, shamayim. That's what it is. And the lulav is nanuim, and the kiddush that you're holding it and you're making a declaration, mekadesh the yom. And what Rav Asher Weiss tries to explain is, when Rashi said Zeh keli ve'anveyu, the Gemara in Sukka, it's not to be saying there's a psul of a lulav yavesh because of anveyu, because the Gemara further along says in Lamed Aleph that it really is a result of Hiddur. I'm going a little too far afield, but he has a few more twists and turns. For Rav Asher Weiss is a general principle, and sometimes Chazal decided, okay, this one we're gonna say this one's li'ikuva. The Rav said, why is that true? Now the two of them didn't ever meet, yeah. Maybe Rav Asher Weiss sat in some shiurim from the Rav, I don't know, but I don't think the Rav never consulted Rav Asher Weiss. There's too much of an age differential, right? But the Rav wanted to know, why is that true? In other words, Zeh keli ve'anveyu. So here, there, where are you applying it? And the Rav came up with this whole idea of the two classic Rav Soloveitchik, Tzvei Dinim, and what it means when we speak about Zeh keli ve'anveyu. Not to denigrate Chalila Rav Asher Weiss, you see also his analysis, very keen, trying to understand things back and forth. But for Rav Asher Weiss, we have a general principle, we have its sometimes application in a very limited circumstance when the writing of the name of Hashem takes place. For the Rav, it also, and then he tries to explain away. I won't explain it now. We don't have enough time. I want to move to the next sugya. But he basically said, the Minchat Asher says, the psul of lulav hayavesh is actually not really for Rashi even because of Zekhi Leveu. It says that, but it doesn't really mean it in that way. There's a whole explanation of how he gets there. For the Rav, absolutely the Rashi meant it that way, and it wasn't about other Gemaras linking lulav and etrog. It stood on its own in this context. Okay, I hope I didn't lose everybody in this excursus. Everybody looks awake, so that's good. So that's the end of the first section already for today. Now we go back to the Gemara, our Gemara. Remember, Chavtet Amud Bet. If you look at the first few lines of the Gemara, which we already saw in depth several times, let's read it again. We're not going to go too far, but let's see how far we can get in the next little bit. The Gemara says, Kapasik Vitani, Loshna B'Yom Tov Rishon, Loshna B'Yom Tov Sheni. The Gemara declares that the Mishnah has not differentiated between day 1 and days 2 through 7. Fine. Bishlama Yavesh, Hadar Ba'inan, Veleka. We understand why, if it's dried out, it's not good, because we require Hiddur. We do not have that standard, Veleka. But rather, Ella Gazul. What about if it's stolen? So Bishlama Yom Tov Rishon, Dichtiv Lachem Mishalachem. We understand on the first day, that has to be Lakachtem Lachem Bayom Harishon. I won't put the pasuk up. We saw it already the other 4 shiurim, right? Lachem means Mishalachem. El B'Yom Tov Sheni Amaylo, but why not on the second day? Amar Yochanan Mishum Rishon Ben Yochai Mishum Dehavale Mitzva Hababa Aveira. Yeah. So Rishon Ben Yochai says, oh, that's because of a principle Mitzvah of Aveira. Now look with me at the Gemara in 29b. If you look at Rashi, and Tosafot accords with this as well. Rashi understands, there's a method to my madness. I know we learned this Gemara already, but I want to show you, so there's a paradigm shift in these few lines of the Gemara that impacts a lot of the aspects that come next. The Gemara says, Rashi says, Kapasik Vatani Pasul, in other words, it used the categorical language, a dried out lulav, a stolen lulav, Pasul, but it didn't distinguish, Lo Shna B'Yom Tov Rishon, writes Rashi, Dichiyuve Midoraita, on the first day, it's the Oraita, to take the lulav, Lo Shna B'Yom Tov Sheni, the late lulav elam midirabanan, where the taking of the lulav is only dirabanan. To biyama rishon ktiv, because on the first day it says specifically ulakachtem lachem, and so we understand. But the second day, remember days 2 through 7, taking of the lulav in the etrog, it says the dalminim, is strictly dirabanan. Bishlama yavish, we get it why yavish is not going to be good. Why? Pasul bidirabanan nami. It's also no good bidirabanan. Came in the mitzvah mishum zeichel mikdash ba'inan hidur mitzvah. Since it is a mitzvah that was enacted by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai as a hidur mitzvah, as a zeichel mikdash, it requires hidur mitzvah. Okay, Tosafot, which we will not see back inside again, except because Tosafot, after all, are just the addenda and or maybe core agenda, the critique, the critical gloss, whatever you want to say, on Rashi's commentary. So they share a fundamental basic assumption that this Gemara, when it said what it said, was contrasting day 1 and all the other days of Yontif. This is all basic, yeah? Here comes the leap. The Ramban. The Ramban says, if you read all of the Mishnayot from page 29b until page 41a, it's only on page 41a that there is a Mishnah in which the Mishnah actually says the words, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takana. And what's the takana? That we should take the Daled Minim on days 2 through 7 outside of the Mikdash. But until then, all of the other things that happen, right? This was the Gemara, here, the Mishnah rather. Right? This is 41a we're looking at on the screen. Barishona haya lulav nita b'mikdash shiv'ah, uva Medina yom echad. 7 days in the Mikdash, 1 day. Medina means outside of the Mikdash. Mishachara beit hamikdash, hitkin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sheyehei lulav nita b'Medina shiv'ah zeichel hamikdash. After the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made an enactment that the lulav should be taken for 7 days outside of the Mikdash as a remembrance of the Mikdash. There's no more Mikdash. It's the Churban of the Mikdash, yeah? Says the Ramban, I have news for you, Rashi and Tosafot. I think you're reading the Gemara wrong. I think, he says, that the Gemara here in 29b is not contrasting day 1 outside of the Mikdash with days 2 through 7 outside of the Mikdash, but rather the Gemara in 29b, and all of the Gemaras through until 41a, when it's first introduced that there was an expansion of this mitzvah as a Zeichel Mikdash, is what? It's all talking about inside the Mikdash. Now, this is a paradigm shift. Now we're going to go back and learn the Gemara again through the lens of the Ramban. So just to understand, in the base medrash of the Ramban, which was he was the progenitor of the Rashba, who was in turn the Rebbe, etc., of the Ritva, basically, of which from the base medrash there, essentially the Ran emerges from there. This is an entire base medrash. They looked at Rashi and said, no. This Gemara is everything to do with the Mikdash. And therefore, the Gemara's question goes like this. Kapasik v'tane. Loshna, if the Gemara was categorical. If the lulav is dried out, or if the lulav is stolen or dried out, it's puzzle. Says the Gemara, according to the Ramban. Loshna b'yom tov rishon, v'loshna b'yom tov sheni. Doesn't matter if it's the first day of Sukkot in the Mikdash, or if it's days 2 through 7 in the Mikdash. Bishlama yavesh hadar ba'inan v'leka. We understand that you need it to look nice. You're in the Mikdash. But if you don't have it, it's yavesh, so then you don't have it, it's dried out, so that's not going to be kosher. Ella gazul, but what about if it's stolen, and then you want to use it days 2 through 7 in the Mikdash? Bishlama yom tov rishon, we understand that on the first day in the Mikdash, there is a requirement, ulakachtem lachem bayom harishon. It says in the pasuk, lachem, misha lachem. And remember the syntax of the pasuk. We talked about this a few times already, last few shurim, so you should know it by heart. The verse's order, the sequencing of the words here is significant. Ulakachtem lachem bayom harishon. The requirement of lachem is bayom harishon. But in the other days, the end pasuk ends, usmach mifnei Hashem Elokeichem shivat yamim. That is not a requirement. Lachem is not a requirement after day 1. Therefore, the Gemara says, lachem mishel lachem, el b'yom tov sheni, amaylo. Why not? Now, Amr b'yochem mishum mishum b'yochai mishum dahavale mitzvah baba veira. Now look at the pasuk, page 30a. Look at that pasuk on line 2. Shenamar, as it says, v'aveitim gazul v'rapiseach v'rachole. You're bringing me offerings to the Mikdash, which are stolen, lame, ill. Gazul dumi de piseach. Ma piseach late takanta of gazul late takanta. You see, if you look at it through Rashi and Tosafot's view, you have to ask yourself, why did they bring up a korban over here? You live in Lod, you live in Tzipori, so you have a lulav and an etrog. Mitzvah bava, yes, no. Why is the pasuk connected so much? Because actually, Davka, according to Ramban, it makes sense that the whole thing is happening in the Makom HaMikdash. Follow? And this is another way of viewing the Gemara. So the concept here is when this discussion, why is the lulav hagazul pasul in days 2 through 7 in the Mikdash? The answer is it's either mitzvah ba'avera, that's Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Later on page 30a, we're going to see it's the opinion of Shmuel, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani Amar Shmuel. If you look on the narrow lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up in the narrow lines from the bottom, on the narrow lines in 30a, and Lamed Amid Aleph, right? That's Lo Shanu El B'Yom Tov Rishon. El B'Yom Tov Sheni, Mitosh Yotzi B'Shol, Yotzi Nami B'Gazul. If you can borrow it from someone on the second day, then surely you can use a stolen one. Now, I know your ethical barometer, feels like something just got messed up. The pressure, something's wrong over here. It is. That's correct. We're talking just from a strictly legal perspective, a halachic perspective. Lulav, that is shol, that's borrowed, is not lachem, because you borrowed, it's still owned by someone else. But gazul, as we will soon see, is of course in this middle category, because it's true you acquired it through ill-gotten gains, but it's also true that after a certain point, from a halachic vantage point, it became your property. You still have to make restitution. You can't claim that you're not going to make restitution. From a halachic perspective, if the owner gave up, so says the Gemara in Bava Metzia and Chav Gimel, you own the object. It doesn't exonerate you from having to pay it back. It doesn't excuse what you did. It's not an invitation to do these things. The point is that it has implications, halachically, about who owns it. Now, the Ritva, who I told you before, is basically from the line of the Ramban. The Ritva says on the first day, "Ulekachtem lachem is b'mikdash ubagvulin," both in the mikdash and outside. Because remember, everybody agrees on the first day. That's what we saw the Mishnah on 41a that I just showed you before. On the first day of Sukkot, the mitzvah of taking the 4 species is in the mikdash and b'Medina. The other word for Medina is bagvulin. Gulin means in the border area, means anywhere outside of the mikdash. But Medina means in the state. It means anywhere outside of the mikdash. There's a machloket, by the by, between the Rambam and pretty much everybody else about whether when we talk about the mikdash, we mean literally just the Har HaBayit, or whether it also includes all of Yerushalayim. There's a big back and forth. Well, not for now. That's a sugya, Perek Dalet, I think it is, and it comes up. So not for today. But it basically says, maybe you should not learn the chumras of the Makom HaMikdash, where there's a chiyuv. The chumras, not the Makom. The chumras of the first day, maybe don't transfer to days 2 through 7. It doesn't matter where you are. And therefore you need lachem, not for the other days, just for the first day. And if it's not a matter that impinges on the body, the object of the lulav, that's not going to be carried over to days 2 through 7. This is in the manner of the Tosafot that we saw last go-around, 2 go-arounds ago, and 29b on the bottom, by Inan Hader Veleka, that Tosafot was trying to understand, well, what parts of the original mitzvah of day 1 were transferred over into the Zeichel HaMikdash of days 2 through 7? Not lachem. Okay, so then what? Oh, clearly Hiddur was. Why Hiddur and not lachem? Hiddur is basically the thesis of Tosafot. Hiddur is a component of the object, the appearance of the object. And we want its appearance to be retained. But the status of it, we can't make the same requirements. We choose not to, once it's the Rabbanan, of the same high standards of ownership that we had on day 1, transfer to day 2, because the object looks the same. So what we want is a Zeichel HaMikdash. It should look like it did in the Mikdash, but we don't care as much about the halachic standards of ownership and the like. Everyone follow me here? Okay. So, with that in mind, look at Tosafot on the top of page 30a. Actually, before Tosafot, we have to finish a little more in the Gemara. Excuse me. What we just put into now. So, unit 1 today was the Minchat Asher, Hiddur Mitzvah. End of story. There's a lot more to say, but I cut it. Hiddur Mitzvah, an approach of Rav Asher Weiss. Number 1. Number 2, the Ramban's approach to the original piece of the Gemara here is, to me, just it's a paradigm shift about what we're talking about here. According to the Ramban, the whole thing is just about the Mikdash. There is no introduction of the Oraita, the Rabbanan. There's no Zeichel HaMikdash here. That's why the Mishnah doesn't mention it. That's why the Gemara doesn't mention it, because the Gemara is talking about one context, inside the Beit HaMikdash. We only find out later, when the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, okay, now they had to put in an act in Zeichel HaMikdash. And days 2 through 7 is just as much in the Mikdash as day 1 was. Then came the introduction of Mitzvah Baba Avera. Now we go into Unit 3, Mitzvah Baba Avera. Rabbi Yishmael Bar Yochai is the one who points out here, it's an issue of what's called Mitzvah Baba Avera. And he quotes this pasuk, which again, in the rendering of the Ramban, well, in the context of the Mikdash, what do you bring to the Mikdash? Korbanot. The standard is higher, the expectations are greater. So it makes sense that he quoted a pasuk that has to do with Korbanot. By the way, flip back again to your paradigm, back to Rashi Tosafot. How did we explain previously the bringing of this lulav as a mitzvah avera, and the pasuk is dafka about korbanot? Because you're waving it around, because you're using it as an implement to serve Hashem. Because there's a chalot shem shamayim, like there is on a korban. So too on this object called the lulav. Follow? Is everyone with me, or did I lose you? Yes? I need some nods so I know we're plugged in. Yes? It's working. Okay. So now, let's go further into Gemara. I want to see Tosafot, and I'm watching the clock, 13 minutes left. I'll cut it at 9. Blineder. Okay, so here it is. Now, I know everyone has other things to do too. Second line, we had the pasuk that we quoted, right, from the Navi Malachi, Ve'aveitim gazul ve'piseach, ve'achola gazul, dumya to the piseach. We drew there's a logical syllogism. The stolen is just like the lame. As the lame cannot be repaired, so too, if it's stolen, it's a taint that cannot be fixed. Loshna lifnei yerush, I'm on line 4, the last lines. Makes no difference if it's before the Yeush, means the abandonment of ownership rights by the owner. Remember what that means from your days learning Baba Metzia. The Gemara Baba Metzia on Chav Gimel says it's when the owner says, "Vaili lechesron kis." I'm out the money. I'm gonna have to spend it again. When that happens, that's what Yeush means. Now it doesn't matter, and this is the unique piece about Mitzvah of Aveira, because generally we say if it's after, it says here, generally once the guy gives up, it's technically, not ethically, technically that person's. They have to make restitution, they have to pay back, right? But they do own it because the owner has given up the chance they're going to get it back. But Mitzvah Baba Aveira is an indelible taint. Loshna lifnei yeush, v'loshna la'achar yeush. Doesn't matter if it's before the owner gave up or even after. So bishlam lifnei yeush makes sense before yeush because we have a pasuk from Sefer Vayikra right from the beginning. Adam ki yakriv mikem, that a man shall take from in your, it doesn't translate exactly, but a man from within your midst will bring forward. So Chazal have this drasha about these words, Adam ki yakriv mikem. As Adam Harishon did not take from the Gezel, we shouldn't take from Gezel. And the point is that's lifnei yeush. Can't bring something stolen. Amar Rachmana v'lavdideyu. It's not yours. It belongs to someone else. Ela'acha yeush. But after yeush has happened, hakanya b'yeush. You already acquired it. You're a thief. You're no good. You're maneuver. You're going to stand din v'chashben after 120 years, 100%. And if you get caught, and if you don't get caught, you have to make a restitution, do tshuva. But it's still yours. Elalav. Mishum dahavale mitzvah haba ba'aveira. No, says the Gemara, that's the Hiddur Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It is a taint that cannot be removed. Says Tosafot here on our page. Tosafot. As follows. V'hadatani l'kama perik lulav ha'arava lachem mishalachem lahotzit ha'sha'ul v'ha'gazel. Later on, the Gemara will actually have the full drasha of the words ulakachtem lachem be'amarishon. They'll say that lachem means you have to own it, and that's to accept a case of borrowed and stolen. Okay, mishum shalit tzricha delav lachem nafkalan. All right, so it's obvious that the word shaul, borrowed, has to be included there. It's obvious that the word borrowed has to be included there. Because otherwise, you might have thought, hey, I can borrow it from a friend of mine. What's the big deal? I'm just borrowing something from a friend. He's helping me out, and I'm gonna give it back when I'm done. But no, says the Gemara, it's different here actually. Because Shaul, there we needed it. Wait a minute. But without the word lachem, the belav lachem, so nafkalan, what would we have thought? Without the word lachem, we would have thought that it would have been okay to be yotze with stolen. We would have said gazel is still possible. You know why? Mitzvah baba aveira. Oh, the Tosafot is saying here is, wait, why did the Gemara later on have to teach us the word lachem means not borrowed and not stolen? Not borrowed, I get it. We got to learn that. Not stolen? Hey, there's a general principle called mitzvah baba aveira. That's the reason why. You don't need a drush from a pasuk if we have the principle. But why is there a drush from the pasuk? It implies that maybe the principle is not really such a strong principle. Maybe Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, was outvoted. Maybe we don't accept it. Therefore, you need a specific drush to tell you gazel. Now, I want to again differentiate. In the case of Shaul, borrowed, I asked my friend, could I borrow your lulav for a minute? Can I borrow your lulav? You didn't give it to me as a gift. I'm borrowing his property. It's not mine. But gazel is, I go over to my friend, soon to be not my friend, and I grab it away from him and I say, you'll never get it back. And I start running away with it. And while I'm running away, it's a maniacal moment. I'm flipping over I'm making the brach, I'm flipping the etrog, I'm making shechianu, I'm dancing, I'm doing stuff. So why would I think that's more mine than if I borrowed it? It wasn't mine then, it's not mine now. Because the minute I take it, the guy says, oh, forget it, I'll never forget it. When he said forget it, it's mine now. Now it's mine. The Gemara wants you to know that's not going to work either. Lachem means yours, not borrowed, not stolen. Tosafot would say, yeah, but there's a principle, mitzvah baba avera. You didn't have to learn it from the word lachem. You learned it already from an idea of mitzvah baba avera. The principle seems so much stronger than a drasha from a pasuk. Especially when gezel means you might actually really technically own it. The Gemara here was pointing out on 30a that regardless of whether the guy gave up or not, you still can't use it because it has a stamp on it saying Mitzvah B'Avera. So Tosafot, they're pointing this out. But wait a minute, right? Even without Lachem teaching us Lemait to minimize the possibility that you'll take something stolen, it's still Mitzvah B'Avera. The Afal Gav Dikra, even though the pasuk that wants to show us that you can't use Gezel. What's the pasuk that was used? Gabe Korban Ktiv, even though it was a context of Korban, meaning that something stolen cannot be used as a Korban, and it wasn't said with regard to general mitzvot. Nonetheless, Uhadin B'chol Mitzvot Dahave Deoraita. We see that the pasuk, even though it was in a particular context of Korbanot, say from Malachi, actually we apply it across the board to all biblical mitzvot. And it's trying to apply it that something that is stolen has a psul attached. And we know that this is true, that it is a shas-wide principle called Mitzvah B'Avera. Kidemuchach b'reish hagozel kama. In Parak hagozel kama, Baba Kama, Gabe hare shegazal se'ah shel chitin, v'tachana, v'afa'a, v'hifrish mimena chala. A person stole a bag of wheat. Now, one of the ways you acquire something is by transforming it. So you took the wheat, you ground it up, made flour, kneaded the dough, baked it into bread, and now I'm religious. I have to be mafresh challah. I stole the wheat. Nobody's perfect. So now I want to be mafresh challah. So the Gemara there says, it's true that when you made the wheat into flour, you were kone b'shinoi, means you acquired it by transforming the object. That's true. But nonetheless, you cannot be doing the mitzvah of frashat challah. You know why? De'ein ze mevarech eliminates. You're not blessing on the challah that you're being mafresh. You're blaspheming by making such a bracha. Why? Because mitzvah ba'avera. So Tosafot say the principle of mitzvah ba'avera is a shas-wide principle. It's not limited to the world of korbanot, even though that's the pasuk that was quoted. And we should recognize that the truth is, we're not entirely sure why did we need the word lachem to minimize stolen items when we have this shas principle altogether. Let's keep going in Tosafot.
But why would we even need the Mishnah lulav hagazel if there's a wide? Why would we even need that those two words in the Mishnah if there's that principle shas wide?
Right. So that's what the Gemara. That's exactly the question of the Gemara on 29b. That's what the Gemara is querying. Remember, that's the question.
Maybe I misunderstood. I don't want to hold anything
go
up, but
back
I
to
thought the Gemara was
29b.
questioning Yom
Okay.
Rishon versus the rest other days.
Right, but the point is that lachem mishel lachem is to be a might day one, automatically. That's 29b, right? Day one, it's out. But the Gemara says, let's go with the Rashi Tosafot understanding of things. It never told us what to do on days 2 through 7. Is it the same principle? Luvagal doesn't work? Yes, is Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. That principle is operative too, but not because of lachem mishel lachem, because of mitzvah haba ba'avera. Okay, but
wouldn't that also apply day one?
That's the point.
Okay.
Doesn't mitzvah haba ba'avera apply to any mitzvah to oraita? Yes, it does. That doesn't say. So why do we need a drasha further along where the word lachem? It's quoted here in our Gemara, but the source of it just comes later. Where lachem, mishal lachem, lemay et agazel.
Okay.
We already knew it from a Shas principle that applies across the board. Follow? Or not?
I'll look at it again. It's okay. Keep going.
Okay. The first piece here of Tosafot is to teach us that the notion of mitzvah b'avera is a shas-wide principle. It's not limited to the world of korbanot, and when it's being applied to Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, it's apt, even though the pasuk is from korbanot, that it be applied to this principle. The question is, yeah, but later on, it makes clear that the word lachem, we could have already derived on the biblical level that the word lachem means lemait, shaul, and gazul. So the Gemara, the Tosafot would say, yeah, the truth is, so it is a bit of a question because we already have this shas principle of mitzvah b'avera that applies to mitzvot Bain deorabanan and bain deoraita. Doesn't matter throughout all of Shas. Point 2 of Tosafot. Tosafot asks, "V'im tomorrow, if you're going to ask, the comment further along, the paslina lulav shalashiv shliur negdach the michtat shiurei." The Gemara is going to say the problem with a lulav that is of an ashera tree or a lulav that comes from an ir negdachat is that it's kitute mechtat shiurei. It's that from a halachic vantage point, since these objects are going to be burned, therefore they have a stature and a height of less than a tefach. They've been squished down. It looks bigger. Halachically, this does not have standing. It's not 4 tefach anymore. It's a little tiny thing. It doesn't have the right shear anymore. Why? Because it's about to be burned. And the Gemara says, Tosafot say rather, wait a second, tepuk mishum mitzvah bab avera. Why don't you just invoke mitzvah bab avera in that case too? Right? The reason why you can't use the lulav shalasher shilir nidachat is mitzvah bab avera. What are you giving me some idea that the reason is because it's supposed to be burned, therefore it's like it doesn't exist. So Vitu, further, Amai Sharinan, the lava shera de Moshe. Why do we permit a person, and we do permit b'diavad, a person to take a lulav, which was worshipped as an Asherah tree, that is not actually one of the Asherahs from the time Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember that the Torah in Parshat Re'eh says that you should destroy the Asherah trees that exist in the land of Israel and Eretz Canaan. Let's say hypothetically, though, there was an Asherah tree somewhere else, and someone bowed down to it. It's not the Asherah de Moshe. It's an object, though, that was worshipped as a Avodah Zarah. But you know what? B'diavad, Rava says elsewhere in the Gemara, if you happen to worship it by accident or on purpose, doesn't matter, you still can use it as the mitzvah of lulav. Really? Why do you say mitzvah of avera over there? Not invoked. Not invoked. Very strange. Answers Tosafot. Yesh lomar, b'yesh lomar, de lo dami legazel. That these sins, the sins of the ir hanidachat, meaning that the whole town has to be destroyed, or in the case of an Asherah, that is also an Asherah de Moshe, so that's not mitzvah of avera. Why? Because when it comes to thievery, the machman avera hagezel ba hamitzvah sheyotzebo. That's the line to underline. It's on account of the sin of stealing that enables the mitzvah. That's mitzvah baba avera. Then it actually acquires that status. Aval hane, but these cases, a lulav av Asherah, or an avodah zarah, right? Even though an avera was being done with the object, atu machmad avera shenasit bo minafik bei. Do we want to say though that actually on account of the avera that was done with it, that's why I'm able to be yotze? No, you're not yotze the mitzvah with this object because of the avera that was done to it or with it. There's two ledgers. There's the negative thing that happened with this object, and then there's the fact that you're doing a mitzvah with it. But that's not mitzvah of avera. Mitzvah of avera focuses again and again on stealing because the way it came to your hand, the way you got it, was itself a chet. That's what mitzvah of avera is for the Balei Tosafot. And that's why the Gemara has to explain, separate from Gezel, starting in the Mishnah, that Asherah Shilur Nidachat is puzzle. Remember we saw in the Mishnah that it was Lulav Agazav Ayavish puzzle, Asherah Shilur Nidachat puzzle. Why don't you put them all together? Why are you writing the word puzzle several times? Because for different reasons. The Lulav Asherah Shilur Nidachat is because it is Kitute Machtat Shiurei. It's true that you can't use them, but it's not because of mitzvah b'avera. Avera. It's because halachically they don't exist anymore. They're down to 1 tefach long, and that's not a long enough shear halachically to use for the lulav. Therefore, it's going to be destroyed, and you can't use it for mitzvah purpose. But that's not what mitzvah avera is. When people start with the mitzvah avera in a general sense, they don't know what they're talking about. So they say anything that has anything to do with an avera you can't use for a mitzvah. But that's not necessarily true. Tosafot say you're going too far. Now I'm skipping the rest of Tosafot. There's 2 other pieces in Tosafot. One is they have an argument about a particular girsa in some of the manuscripts about an etrog of Asherah. I'll skip it. And then they ask a question at the end about a matzah that is of tevel, that didn't have a frasha truna matzah, that you made matzah out of it, kind of mitzvah. Don't have time to do that now. We're out of time. Ed, you want to say something?
The mitzvah of avera is you can only you need the avera in order to do the mitzvah. I mean, you couldn't The
Yes.
Avera is what facilitates your ability to do mitzvah. The other one, you just
Yes.
have to use it for a different purpose.
Correct. And the truth is, if you had a lulav that someone bowed down to this lulav to try to worship as a avodah zarah, and then you pick it up and you decide you want to use it to break a bracha on it, you could do that. B'diavad.
As long as you own
Really,
it.
you should. What?
As long as you own it.
As long as
You
you
say
own
you
it.
picked it,
You
right?
can't steal
Right.
it. Right. You can't.
Right.
But you cannot steal it.
Right.
Anyway, okay, that's all we have time for tonight. We just started scratching the surface of Mitzvah Avera. We saw one Tosafot here. We tried to understand a little bit about what's going on with the principle of Mitzvah Avera and the fact that according to Tosafot, it's not just applied here to Lulav HaGazul, but actually is a Shas-wide concept, and that particularly in our context, we should recognize that it needs to be, as Ed just pointed out, it's what facilitates or enables the mitzvah to be performed. That's the taint. And that's what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is dealing with. More to come, God willing, next week, Monday night, same time. We'll look forward to it. Yashikol to everybody. I wish everyone a great night.